Awakening is not a race. It's not a path of rushing towards something away from where we're at. But because of the nature of mind and the nature of our suffering, we can feel like we want a solution really, really quickly. And if I try harder, if I push faster, I'm going to get there. And then this thing called awakening is going to solve all of my problems. And as such, we can find ourselves on a path of rushing and striving, ultimately. It's definitely been my experience from speaking to others and in my own life as well, that most people, certainly in the Western world, but most people, they don't need to learn how to strive harder towards waking up. We're pretty good at striving in the West. We're pretty good at trying harder, thinking we need to do better, thinking we need to go faster, which is kind of ironic because look how fast the pace of life is, in our life. It's like information bombarding us from all corners, notifications on our phones. Yeah, just things happening at 100 miles an hour. Yet we think that the reason that we haven't got peace on this path of awakening, the reason we're not fully realised and awake yet, we're not fully free from suffering, is because we're not trying hard enough. We're not applying our efforts enough. And this, I certainly would say, out of a lot of the pitfalls on this path of awakening, this is a major one. And I mentioned before, I felt it so hard in my life, this drive to succeed, this drive to be better, this striving, which comes from a place of lack, pretty much always. So there's a feeling inside that I don't have enough, I don't have what it takes, I'm not good enough, or this is too much, I need it to be different. So then, because I felt some movement on a path, I've felt some value in meditation or contemplation or inquiry, I think I'm going to push harder, try harder, work harder, be faster, let's go. And it's exhausting. And even if you've had an awakening experience, you can still feel the habit of the body, this being that's been conditioned by this outlook in the world to just keep running. And it can be really hard to settle into just relaxation. There's a restlessness often when we try to stop. And that restlessness drives us into distraction and delusion and coping mechanisms that we know don't work really. We know that they're not going to give us deep satisfaction. And the difficulty is after an initial awakening, we can then see it happening as well, which can be doubly frustrating. So if you get a chance to remind yourself on this path at any stage and you find yourself really striving, just remind yourself that this awakening process is not a race. It will go at its own pace, really. And it always points back to not something in the future to be achieved, but a realization in this moment to be open to. And once we feel that, once we start to remember and embody that, we keep coming back here. Just come back here and relax. Another aspect of the way in which this isn't a race, races are competitive. A race by definition is a competition. This awakening journey that we're on, we're not in competition with anything. In fact, it's the idea that this life is competitive which often holds us back and drives that striving outlook. So sometimes you can feel it when you maybe hear other people online talking about their awakening experiences or their insights, and it can come up as wanting to defend yourself or wanting to correct somebody else. Or maybe it's just an internal thing where we think, oh, I should be where they are. I should be further on the path. Right, okay, I need to try harder. And you can see it's all pointing back to that same source, isn't it? That sense of lack. But when we compare our apparent selves to apparent others on this path of awakening, it drives competition. And competition is just a fallacy. It's a delusion, really. It's something that distracts us from this moment, and it keeps us bound to suffering. So again, another thing to remind yourself, or just to recognize, feel when there's a sense of competitiveness coming up in the body, in the mind, in the heart, either against others, or also sometimes we're competitive with ourselves. So maybe we're not living up to our expectations of being the most awake, most kind, most loving person in the world. Well, of course we're not going to be. We'll never live up to an expectation in the mind, because expectations in the mind are always unrealistic. But when you feel that, notice the competitive aspect of it, and notice how it drives that striving, racing, pushing attitude. In a lot of my videos, I've often used different synonyms or different ways to describe awakening. None of them are true, and yet they all point to truth. So here's another one. I'll give it a go. You could say that awakening is nothing other than being able to totally relax into the present, always. In each moment, being able to totally relax into this moment. So with that in mind, you can see how, well, actually striving is counterintuitive to that. Racing is counterintuitive to that. So take a break. Give yourself a little bit of space. Recognize when the heart is grasping and striving for something other than what's here. And just take your foot off the gas every now and then.